Inner freedom. What do we understand by the reference to being more free? Sometimes work on self has been defined as something that gains more inner freedom for us, and therefore the question arises as to whether inner freedom means just doing whatever we like as we are now. Most would answer that it does not consist of doing what we like. However, of course, it takes a long time to realize this fact. We take some time to understand that doing what we like does not grant us any freedom. On the contrary, it's really a form of servitude. Until we attempt more consciously to go against doing always what we mechanically like. We then begin to observe that doing what we like is not really what we do like. When we are governed by our passions, by all mechanical impulses, and by getting our own way, we are not quite comfortable in ourselves, which is why following self-will does not lead to any real satisfaction in the long term. In matters of this nature, we have to begin from a sincere basis, and not from some theoretical one. In other words, from actual self-observation, as to what happens when we simply do whatever we like, say from our lazy side, from our sensual side, or from a jealous whim, from negativity. It is so easy to say theoretically that one does not really like to do as they like, but in truth we are always doing as we choose to. For example, we are constantly avoiding effort that, in a kind of way, we know we should make. Until we can genuinely acknowledge that by doing simply what we like in any moment, we are not at peace with ourselves, that something deeper and forceful lies within us. Until we see that this is true and genuinely feel it, we fail to understand what any work is really about. This has been realized through the ages and is one of the most extraordinary things about the past. To realize that people have always thought across time that they cannot do whatever they please. How do we account for this running throughout history unless we admit that other influences are acting upon us than those of our self-will, than those of our appetites? Here lies one of the turning points in our understanding of work. As we begin to realize that something else acts upon us more so than simply having our own way, this must be internally realized, that pure self-gratification does not lead to any sort of inner harmony or peace of mind. When it comes to not doing what we like, we are first of all under the external laws of our country, region, town, and society, which prevent us through fear of retribution from doing many things that we would otherwise do out of self-will. This is the first check, but note that it is a purely external one. An individual who obeys the law out of fear is not by any measure a good person. Most people do not feel any other check in themselves, and would, if there were no such thing as external laws and the fear derived from them, behave in a quite impossible manner, simply because there is no internal goodness of being. So first of all, there have to be external restraints built up through the rule of law to make any civilization possible, as otherwise we'd simply be living in the Wild West, governed by vigilantism. However, there are also internal restraints that can act upon us through the influence of work. These are connected with real conscience. In other words, we must learn to distinguish between the two kinds of restraints. Through the development of inner taste, we realize the unpleasantness of negative states. But there is no external law about negative states. The police do not arrest you for being negative, in spite of how good it might be if they did. All negative states in their full culmination lead only to violence, to revenge, and even to actual bodily harm. In which case, of course, external law steps in. The commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," is first of all a literal one and refers to the rule of law. However, its psychological meaning is something quite different, as psychologically we kill a great many people or otherwise mutilate and harm them whenever we grow negative. If we really did what we liked, we would be arrested by law enforcement in this respect. External laws, to a certain extent, prevent us from doing what we like, but the internal influences of work that can begin to act on us if we emotionally feel that work restrain us in quite a different manner from doing whatever we like. As our work grows richer in understanding and more subtly connected, we begin to hesitate about many things that we were unaware of before. We start to build up a new orientation to everything and to everyone. A new house, new decor, new style. When this begins, we know that we cannot behave in certain ways, think and feel in certain ways as we did before, with impunity. The entire approach to ourselves, our approach to and concept of other people begins to become a much finer, more interesting thing. When this happens, we begin to float, as it were, to lift ourselves up off the ground and learn how to sail, to ride the wind. From all this arises second body, i.e., some organized form that consciousness begins to occupy, which is psychological, quite apart from any physical body that we possess along with all of its acquired reactions. We then begin to have life in ourselves, to live in life and not simply to be molded by our reactions to life. We begin to live in our lives and no longer to be simply of life, of the world, of mechanical reactions to external events and external things. Our psychology begins to be of the work and not simply of life. Then we know that we cannot do just as we like or as we did like, but have to follow, have in fact to like another range of ideas, another meaning of ourselves and another mode of living in our lives instead of being simply our lives. If we try to do as we like mechanically, we are of the earth, earthwalkers as it were. There is nothing to distinguish us from the earth, from life, and from all its incidents. When we raise ourselves up through the influences of work on self, we learn to touch the earth differently, to shift our conscious awareness to the edge of the earth, where it meets the sea, and then to live in a different medium, to sail above the earth, to be in some vessel that is not of this earth, a vessel that is real so that we suffer if we step out of it. This journey, this voyage, is often represented in esoteric myths, and this is the best way of understanding what the form of second body means. A psychological body, a psychological room that lifts us off the sensual earth of ourselves. To maintain this body, to keep it in repair and to develop it further, we have to like another set of liking, another set of values, a new set of ideas. The work says, work against dislikes. It also says in this regard that we should try to like what we dislike and dislike what we like. The best example of this is simply to take negative emotions, which we like, and then think deeply about our relationship to them. Because once we realize that whenever we are negative, it is our own fault, whatever the external cause might be, we begin to have a completely new orientation formed within us, a new psychological body. We no longer take our pound of flesh, because if we do, if we feel like that, then we will be right down on the earth of ourselves again. All workforce will leak away from us immediately, and we lose gumption. Every atom of increased consciousness will disappear, and we find ourselves once more amongst the clamor and confusion of ordinary everyday life. We lose that body of the work, this vessel, this ark that we have built for ourselves. It is said that we must put ourselves under more laws to become free, which is exactly what the work says. The work notes that an individual must put themselves under the laws of work, under more laws, in order to reach any development, which is our liberation. All freedom in an esoteric sense is due to inner development, both on the side of knowledge and on the side of being. This forms in us a new level of understanding. A higher level of being is always freer than a lower level. To get to a higher level of being, we must put ourselves under more laws than belong to our present level of being. We can either live mechanically according to the laws belonging to our level of being, or we can begin to live in a new way, more consciously, according to the laws of a higher level of being. This is the objective of any work which teaches us what we have to strive for in ourselves to reach a higher level of being. Not through simple obedience in a blind way, but an intelligent perception of new knowledge that the work is speaking about. Through understanding it, which is the most powerful force that we can create in ourselves. This work is not a series of literal commandments to obey like the Decalogue, but a set of new ideas and new insights to make us think and see things in a new manner. Then gradually to come of our own volition to the truth of them within ourselves, from the development of our own understanding and personal experience. As one ascends the ray of creation, we come under fewer laws. It is important to understand this idea, and that is why it is often said that we must understand something about the meaning of the ray of creation. Suppose that our being falls under 48 orders of laws, and we do just as we please. An individual under 48 orders of laws is far down the ray of creation, and in a very bad place, as can be seen from our day-to-day existence. This is not a very good world. Such an individual could come under, to begin with, 24 orders of laws, even while they exist on the planet Earth. Then ultimately under 12, which is within the solar suboctave. However, in order to acquire this new freedom, because obviously to be under 24 orders of laws is to be in greater freedom than under 48 orders of laws, we must place ourselves for the time being under more laws, to eventually fall under fewer laws. We must obey this work according to our growing understanding of it, living more and more consciously in accordance with what the work teaches. When we begin to see the necessity of this emotionally, we are already very close to a change in our level of being. But that change will not take place as long as we see the work as something external, as simply a series of rules that are carved into granite slabs, as statements of dogma. When we begin to see the truth of the work for ourselves, based on our personal journey, that is the first stage. The next step is then to begin to apply our willpower to it. When we can start to will what we understand of any work on ourselves, then that is the second stage. Because there we begin to pass under fewer laws by having kept ourselves to more laws, to a higher standard of being. This is the direction of freedom according to work and according to all esoteric teaching. On the other hand, if we simply obey our own impulses and focus on the gratification of our appetites, our self-interests, we then look downward and not upward. We look outward and not inward, which is the allegory of the mirror. Thus we tend to journey down the ray of creation to the level of the moon, and become the victims of our own appetites and self-will, casting ourselves further and further into prison, becoming more and more exacting and therefore useless. There are many obvious examples of this, such as people that resort to substance abuse and addiction of any sort. They obviously pass under more and more laws simply by doing what they like, then become incapable of making any sustained effort. All growth is through effort only, through friction and our inner alchemy, where the retort becomes heated. Esoterically speaking, it is only possible through right effort and right mind. For this reason, we have to be guided by some genuine esoteric system as to what kind of effort we are required to make in order to grow. We cannot simply grow by ourselves through our own ideas and a whim to enjoy a better life. We can only grow through new knowledge and new ideas, new concepts of our feelings, of ourselves and what we are. Here, all the work teaching about making personality passive comes into play, because as long as we are under the full influence of an acquired personality, we are not by any means free. Perhaps if we have any trace of real magnetic center in us, then we have probably realized this even before we met the work. To become more free means a change in our level of being, upward and inward through the looking glass. It means a deeper understanding of ourselves and of other people, of the meaning of life and why we are incarnate here on this planet. If we are capable of growth, and if we feel a genuine desire to come under the influences of work, then that change in our level of being will increasingly take place. It may start from a very small seed, a minor but genuine experience that has left a lasting impression upon us. Then that focal point has to struggle with swarms of bad eyes, wrong attitudes, the wrong states, and so on. But if that seed has fallen upon fertile ground, then it will grow eventually, provided that one receives sufficient help and a continual reminder of the ideas of this work, so that gradually, through time, it will grow without much further external assistance. The direction of any growth, upward or inward, is toward inner freedom, because growth means ascending the sidereal octave, diagrammatically toward the sun, and so passing under fewer and fewer orders of laws by freeing ourselves from pseudo-personality. All these ideas must be connected in our mind through reflection, in order to understand what greater freedom truly means. What do we understand by being more free? One person gives this example. One might have considerable worldly ambition, and in pursuit of it be constantly tormented by fears of the adverse effect they might have on others who forward that ambition. If then they can be brought to see the vanity of such strivings, that this ambition leads to nothing but anxiety and distress, then if, in obedience to some higher law, they can completely let it go, its power is broken, and they become immediately free of it and its resulting stress. The more identified we are with life, the more fear we feel. The more we feel that we depend for existence upon external things, which is the wheel of suffering, samsara. The more identified we are with what is outside of us, the more fear of loss we suffer. If our center of gravity is completely external, say in money or possessions, a mansion, appearance, and reputation, the more bound we are to external circumstances. The more mechanical we become, driven by those external circumstances, and so dependent upon them. If our entire happiness and equilibrium depends upon one person, then certainly we become a function of that person, which cannot be right. It is difficult to see how any idea of self-remembering can be understood if one's life is a function of some other person, no matter what the strength of that emotional bond. That's not conscious love, it's codependence. Similarly, as another points out, one can be in the power of a person to whom they have a negative attitude, which is right, and we can see it for ourselves, because we can be wholly in the power of someone that we hate. Is this self-remembering? Obviously not. It is to be purely in the power of the world, purely on and of the earth and the laws of great nature, purely in the power of the senses, of whatever it is that we see externally. Self-remembering has nothing to do with any of this. The feeling we get from hating may seem to us a very powerful feeling of I, But that feeling is not who we are. It is, on the contrary, an I that delights in hating and being cruel, whose domination we have passed under, and to whom we have dedicated our existence in obeisance. The nature of freedom is utterly unknown to those who do not possess conscience, for they make freedom consist of doing exactly what they please in any moment. If it is a question of real conscience, then we are not tortured by it, but are aware of it in a kind of gentle way. If, on the other hand, it is a question of acquired conscience, then we remain tortured. Real conscience is never violent, but its action is so gentle that most of us cannot hear it. We have to stop the traffic of life in us and begin to hear it, because that is far wiser than we are. An old Stoic saying advises that we are all tied in life, as it were, like a dog to a cart, that we have to accept things and not be dragged by the cart, but run along with it. Our position can be likened to that of a dog tied behind a cart, being dragged along by the cart because the dog resists the chain that is leading him. If the dog had not resisted the pull of the chain, but had run along with the cart, he would have enjoyed a far greater freedom of movement. If we object always to everything and expect what we do not find, then we shall be very identified with life and very much hurt by it, dragged along while resenting everything. That is why the work says that one of the very first things we have to do is to become passive to life, which is a difficult thing to understand because we think we can do things and think that things should be different from what they are today. To practice not objecting to anything for a short time every day is a worthwhile exercise. It teaches a lot about ourselves and non-work eyes. To be more passive to life means to be more passive to personality. Is there some degree of inner freedom in directed attention? We are more free simply because we are in more conscious parts of centers, which fall under fewer laws. Different parts of centers are under different orders of laws. Francis Thompson writes, "Soul fully blessed to feel, God whistle thee to heal, when his wings pen thee." We need here to substitute the word God by the work, then realize what it actually means to be called to heal by work. The trouble is that we indulge in all kinds of emotions, not for a moment connecting them with any work or imagining they have no bearing upon the work. It takes a long time for work on self to penetrate even as far as a few eyes in us. The majority of eyes have never heard of work yet in ourselves. So we have to teach the work to all the heathen, as is said in the Gospels and other religious texts. At this level, doing what we like means following the impulse of any eyes under whose control we happen to be in any given moment. This, however, is not freedom, because second force in life will probably prevent us from following that impulse for very long. Even if life is kind to us for a distance, we soon find ourselves in another eye which wants something quite different. At this level, therefore, doing what we like is really meaningless because there is no permanent eye to like anyway. Each eye has its own will, and each eye has its own power over us in the moment, so here emerges a paradox. One eye may do something that it likes, then another eye comes along and dislikes what that eye has done. We do this all the time with food and cravings. All these different wills form contradictory lines and directions. Provided we have strong buffers, we do not notice this, and so feel quite tranquil. It is a dangerous state to be in when we see no contradictions in ourselves and do not feel a certain daily pain, or heat, as the work calls it, the friction of opposites. By more free is meant freedom in part from mechanicalness, from the power that people and events exercise over us, from internal considering, making accounts, from useless self-accusations and a host of other wrong psychic functions, freedom from attitude, pseudo-attitudes, and from habit or acquired habits. Inner freedom is not doing what we like, such as we are now. That means the servitude of impulse in the will of the moment. The idea we have of inner freedom is that it is not achieved through the indulgence of any will of the moment, but by a willingness to be guided by the will born of a perception of truth. As perception grows, then so will grows, and with it, inner freedom is more fully experienced. If we begin to obey the ideas of this work by seeing their truth, eventually realizing what good lies in them, then we begin to be more free from the momentary wills of different eyes, doing whatever they like. This means a more internal movement into ourselves, and is only acquired through self-observation, which moves us back from the outer pretense of ourselves. Self-observation increases self-consciousness, and increased consciousness means a larger view, a wider sense of things, in scale, and therefore a more holistic view. If we begin to obey the ideas of this work by seeing their truth, eventually realizing what good lies in them, then we begin to be more free from the momentary wills of different eyes, doing whatever they like. This means a more internal movement into ourselves, and is only acquired through self-observation, which moves us back from the outer pretense of ourselves. Self-observation increases self-consciousness, and increased consciousness means a larger view, a wider sense of things in scale, and therefore a more holistic view. P.D. Ouspensky would say, "You can do as you please, so long as you remember yourself." Which is quite true, only have you tried it? If you like to remember yourself more than anything else, then you can certainly do what you like, but you cannot expect this to happen just in a moment, a few weeks, or even months. We may understand just a little of what is meant practically after years of work, and even then we might only just begin to understand why this was said. We will not be able to do just as we like if we are in the third state of consciousness. To do just what we like is mechanical. To be in a state of self-remembering is conscious awareness.